Hello, everyone. My name is Elena G. Levine, and I'm president of Quantum Success Solutions and author of the book Networking for Nerds. And I cannot tell you how excited I am to be here with you and with this amazing panel that we have assembled for your benefit. We want to help you succeed in whatever career path you choose. And so we've put this panel together to talk about careers outside of academia. And we will be recording this. In fact, we're recording it right now. You will have a chance to watch this again if you'd like. And if you have any questions during the webinar, during the panel, we invite you to share them in the question console of your webinar dashboard. And so we'll try to get as many questions as we possibly can, but we are really, really excited to be here. So before we do officially begin, I just want to share with you a couple of really exciting announcements about the APS. So the APS is involved and put together this wonderful event. I hope you will attend. It's a virtual poster showcase. It's already taking place. It started on June 1st. It's going to go through September 1st. And I want to give you some stats. This is amazing. This is your community that is participating in this. We already have 1,225 posters from 40 plus nations. We got 4,000 people registered. We got hundreds of connections and collaborations that are taking place in the virtual poster showcase platform. And this is totally free for you to register for. And I highly encourage you to go to the website, psychologicalscience.org/posters. Join this event because the networking is going to be fantastic. The collaboration building is going to be fantastic. The information gathering for your career development and professional advancement is going to be fantastic. I think we can agree it's going to be fantastic. Also, we're going to be hosting a lot of other webinars and panels this year. I hope you will join us. The next one is going to be taking place on August 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll be on the peer review process. And you can go to the website, psychologicalscience.org/webinars to find out information about these and register for the future ones. All right, should we get to the panel? Why not? I'm so psyched about this. All right. Let me introduce my panelists today. And like I said, this team is truly amazing, not only in terms of what they have done in their career, but I really appreciate their support of the APS community, the worldwide APS community, to help you succeed and to help enable your success as you think about careers outside of academia. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Hataka Maeda, who is a psychometrician at the National Board of Osteopathic Medical Examiners. Hi, Hataka, thank you for joining us. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Iona Scully. She is a scientist in human factors at Exponent, which is an engineering and scientific consulting firm. Welcome, Iona. Thanks for being here. We have Dr. Lindsay A. Smith, who is the Director of Research at Cushman & Wakefield, which is a global commercial real estate services company. Hi, Lindsay. Glad you could join us, too. And we also are excited to welcome Dr. Melissa Smith, who is a senior user experience researcher for Google. Hey, Melissa, so happy you're here. And last but not least, we have Dr. Mike Winograd, who is a consultant at ZS, a professional services consulting firm with clients across a range of industries, including healthcare, pharma, high tech, and financial services. So we have an amazing schedule ahead of us, but I want to start by asking the team about your sort of 2-minute career experience. Could you encapsulate for us the experience, the journey that you took in your career and how you ended up in the position that you're in? And why don't we start with Hataka, please?
Yeah, so thank you. So I'm Japanese, I'm born in Japan, and I moved to the United States when I was 7. And in college, I studied exercise science because that was my main interest at the time. And in my 3rd year of college, I got into studying the effects of music on running behavior, and I conducted a bunch of research. And I really wanted to follow through in the path of research, so that's why I went to grad school. And I did my master's, and during my PhD, I decided that data analysis was the best part of research, and I really wanted to focus on it. So I switched my major to psychometrics, which is what I do now. I'm a psychometrician at a testing organization in Chicago. What we do is we make exams for medical students. And basically what we do is we use these exams to make sure that when medical students graduate, they're qualified to become doctors. And I have no medical knowledge, but these exams are very complex statistically, so I handle the statistics. And like one of the reasons for its complexity is students might take the same exam, but they might see different items or different questions. But we have to still score them fairly and consistently. So we make that adjustment statistically. And these exams are similar to other big exams like SAT, GRE, or ACT. For example, if you get a score of 1,000 on the SAT, it doesn't mean that you got 1,000 items correct. You know, there's a lot of complex math goes on behind the scenes. So those are the things that I think about every day.
I thought for sure, Hotaka, that when I got a 1230 on my SATs, that there was no statistics associated with it. So I'm happy that you're assuring me of this. So why don't we jump around here a bit? Melissa, tell us about your career journey.
Sure. So, hi, I'm Melissa. My journey was kind of interesting. I really got into science and tech as a kid. I got involved with FIRST Robotics, which is like this K through 12 program that gets kids excited about science through annual robotics competitions. So when I was going to college, I really wanted to continue like doing robotics and become an engineer. But I found out about human robot interaction, which is actually a subfield of human computer interaction. And I was like, oh wait, this is actually what I want to do. So I started doing research as an undergrad in a cognitive psychology lab, and did an internship with the Navy as an undergrad. And found out about human systems integration and all the cool things that all the applied research that they do within the Navy for human computer interaction and such. So a lot of the Navy positions for scientists are for PhDs. So I was like, okay, I'll get my PhD in this and go into the work for the Navy as a scientist. So I went to George Mason and was studying human factors and applied cognitive psychology, and was super set on going to work for the Navy as a research scientist. And then midway through grad school, that was when the government started shutting down. I don't know if you guys remember that was happening about 5-6 years ago, and things just started, like a lot of my research fellow scientists were sitting at home furloughed, not getting paid. And I was like, wow, I do not want to graduate with this PhD and, you know, not have work depending on if Congress decides to fund science that day or not. So I started looking into other opportunities and career paths, and found out that Google actually Google and a lot of tech actually hires cognitive psychologists, or just scientists in general, for a lot of their user experience work or a lot of their applied product development work. So did an internship with Google and fell in love with it. Love the scale and reach of the work that you're able to get done with, and still like the underlying science that's available and used for guiding product development. And yeah, I've been with Google 4 years now. I started with YouTube, was there for 3.5 years, and recently switched over to Stadia in beginning of this year. So that's the 2-minute summary.
No, that's fabulous. You know, and it's I like that we have on this team today, we have people who have such interesting and very diverse career paths. And, you know, it's important for us to remember that psychological trained and psychologically educated, psychologically science educated professionals are absolutely needed in organizations around the world in all different sectors. And I think your work at YouTube and later on in Google demonstrates that. Thank you. Iona, tell us about your career journey.
So when I started out in undergrad, I wanted to be a clinical psychologist, interestingly enough. And then I took my first stats course, and for some reason, I just really, really liked stats. So I ended up getting into research methods and going to grad school to study human memory and understanding how human memory changes over time. And I had the full intent when I started grad school to actually go into academia and become a professor. And then the longer that I was in academia, the more I sort of, my mindset began to change, and I wanted to, and I knew that the job market in academia was a difficult one, and it would be incredibly difficult, especially to get something like a tenure track job right out of grad school. You have to go for a postdoc, and I made some decisions. I talked to people in industry. I reached out to people via different places like LinkedIn. I talked to people my professors knew, and I kind of learned about the different areas. I went to conferences and talked to people at their tables, and learned about the different kind of careers that were possible. And I ended up right out of grad school getting a job at Exponent, which is where I am now. I've been there for a year now. I actually got my PhD last year. So I've been at Exponent for a year, and I do a lot of work. Specifically, I have my PhD in cognitive psychology, and I do a lot of work related to cognitive issues, attention, memory, decision making, all involved in sort of like litigation matters, as well as consulting for tech companies and things like that related to psychological science and psychological issues and human factors.
Thank you so much. Again, another interesting journey, and how fabulous it was for you that you realized what it was that you wanted to do and what it is that you enjoyed doing, and perhaps a different ecosystem that would bring you even more joy and enable your success in a new, exciting way. Mike, why don't we ask you, what has been your career journey, please?
So I think my experience kind of largely mirrors what Iona just said. I was the kind of person who was like certain about what I wanted to do coming out of high school. I knew I wanted to go to college. I knew I wanted to go to med school and become an orthopedic surgeon. And then very quickly in college realized I didn't like biology. And I happened to take a few courses in psych and really liked them. So changed my majors. I happened to take one class then about lying and deception with the professor that eventually became my grad school advisor. And then my entire time in grad school, I knew that I wanted to be a professor, and I knew I wanted to teach and do research. But then about 6 months from graduation, when I was in the process of applying and trying to find postdocs and find funding for my postdoc, I realized that I really just did not like the process of publishing, and I really didn't like the process of trying to get grants and fellowships. And I realized that if that's what I wanted to do with my career, that would be a big focus of mine for the next 10 to 15 years. And then would remain a main thing I would have to do for the rest of my life working. So at that point, I kind of made the decision that I wasn't going to go into academia. I really had no idea what I wanted to do. You know, the field of deception detection was pretty small. I didn't want to work with the government. Melissa, you know, some of the reasons you said made sense for me too. And so I actually took some time off after I graduated and traveled. I skied a lot, which is something I figured I wouldn't have the chance to do again at another point in my life. And then ultimately started looking for jobs in industry where I felt like I could have some sort of a connection to what I did in undergrad and grad school that would still be related to psychology, but maybe not directly what I was doing. And ultimately landed on market research as being an area that made a lot of sense, because at its core, I felt like it was still trying to understand human behavior. And I found a job with a small boutique firm that focused on qualitative market research in healthcare and pharmaceuticals, which, as you know, the former pre-med, was kind of the perfect subject matter for me. Worked at that company for just under 2 years, and then came to my current company just about 4 years ago. I continue to do primarily market research there. I do a big mix of qualitative and quantitative work, and I focus primarily in the oncology space and immunology. So it's, yeah, as I said, I feel like I'm connected to what I used to do, but it is definitely different doing it in industry than in academia.
Thank you so much. And of course, Lindsay, tell us about your career journey, please.
Sure. First of all, I just want to thank the APS for hosting this session. I know when I graduated 5 years ago, I felt like I was very much in the dark on how to make that transition to industry. And this is just a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So as I mentioned, I got my degree in cognitive psychology from Northwestern in 2014. I studied analogical reasoning and cognitive development. I'm really not doing that now, but there are a lot of skills that I developed through that process that I still find I'm using today. I was actually pretty late in the game in my decision to leave academia and go into industry. I had a postdoc lined up. I was home for Christmas break. I had some really in-depth conversations with my family, and for a variety of reasons realized that academia was not the path I wanted to take. And so I had to scramble and say, okay, well, what am I going to do now? I did some research and I figured out the terms, the industry terms for what I like doing were consumer insights and market research. And I decided, okay, let me look for jobs in consumer insights and market research. But I also wanted a job that was at the intersection, not just of research, but my other one true love, which is food and beverage. And so that's how I found Compass Group. Compass Group is the largest contracted food service provider in the world. If you've been to a sporting event, if you've eaten food at a hospital or a university or a corporate campus like Google, you've eaten Compass's food. And at the time, about 4 or 5 years ago, when I was making that transition, Compass had an analytics group, and they were just starting their consumer insights function within that team. So they hired me on to build that function. I was the first person on that team. Over 4.5 years at Compass, built that up to a team of about 10. And really what the team focused on, I mean, as the initial person there, I really got to set strategy. So here's what research should look like for an organization like this. Here's the types of methodologies we're going to bring in. Here's the types of data we're going to bring to the table. And here's how we're going to use it to make Compass smarter about how it programs its hospitality experiences. So really got to build up that team. It was a ton of fun, but about 4.5 years into it, for a variety of reasons, I decided I was ready for my next move. And at that point, a headhunter had approached me and said, hey, I saw your LinkedIn profile, really compelling stuff on there. It looks like you were able to build this team from nothing. I have a company who's looking to do the same thing here in Chicago. Would you be interested? And that's how I ended up at Cushman and Wakefield. So now I'm here building up, again, rebuilding essentially their research function, trying to help them think of new ways to leverage consumer insights, third-party data, primary research to drive the real estate business and help our clients make smarter decisions. Over the last couple months with the onset of COVID, I've actually also started working with Cushman's workplace experience team. So this is a team that goes around the world and essentially surveys employees to really understand how clients can optimize that workplace experience. Somebody told them that I have a deep expertise in Qualtrics, as I'm sure a lot of people on this phone do, background in survey methodology, and they wanted me on that team to really help drive this really critical project for them. So the past couple of months, I've been, splitting the fence between building up this research function and then also helping the workplace experience team.
It sounds like you have found for yourself and helped create a really enjoyable, really fun career path in this profession.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask the team if there has been, since we know the people on this call today, on this webinar, are interested perhaps in moving beyond academia. You've all sort of hinted at this, but I'd like to hear if you can specify, was there a certain action that you took that helped to ease or facilitate your move into industry and land your job in industry? Lindsay, you mentioned being on LinkedIn. It sounds like the whole team has mentioned doing research about the different career paths. Who would like to talk a little bit about what action we could take if we wanted to move beyond academia for our career?
I mean, I can say something.
Please.
So there are several different things that I found were really helpful to moving into a non-academic career. And I heard some people talk about things like internships and things like that, which are really important and helpful. And I think for me, I sort of made the decision before, like toward the end of my PhD, so I didn't even know how to sort of get into that kind of, I'd go into the internship kind of way, so I didn't go that route. Instead, what I did to help facilitate was find ways in order to gain experiences and skills that the PhD didn't exactly give me, more skills with working with groups of people, more skills with budgeting, and more skills with managing and things like that. So I became really involved in different groups, and that includes APS. I was the membership and volunteers officer on the student board for 2 years. And those kind of experiences gave me more interpersonal skills, more talking about my research at a more accessible level, and also skills in managing and budgeting and communicating with people across the country and across the world. And I think that getting those skills, more soft skills, were really important to helping with my transition.
I'm so happy you said that, Iona, because we just do not do enough emphasis in our STEM education and STEM training on those soft skills, on those business skills, which could help us, honestly, with any career path we take. Thank you for mentioning that. Does anybody else on the team want to share a thought about an action that would help to facilitate or ease?
So one thing that I would say is there are a lot of skills that maybe we don't have the opportunity to develop in graduate school, but there are a lot of skills that we did develop. And so a really important exercise is trying to figure out, how do I translate my CV into a resume? So thinking about all those domain general skills that you built up, learning how to manage projects with minimal supervision, finding an ambiguous problem and trying to solve it, right? All of these skills that I think PhDs are almost uniquely equipped to handle. Those are all skills that are needed in business. We've just got to make sure we are talking the same language as the recruiters and the HR teams in these businesses.
Absolutely, and language is a key thing. I mean, if we are moving into a new ecosystem, we need to be able to speak that ecosystem's language if they're going to understand the value that we could potentially provide, especially if we're shifting from academia into a new space. So I'm glad you brought that up. Does anybody else want to share with this topic? We're already getting questions from the audience.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yes, Akita.
So for psychometricians, it's very common to go into the industry. So once you go into a psychometric major, it's more likely that you're going to go into the industry than stay in academia. Both are common, but industry is very common too. But I think the problem is a lot of people don't even know that psychometrics exists. So if you have any interest in math and you also like psychology, then I think you should look into it.
It's a good combination of things that that people might be very interested in. Anybody else want to tackle this question?
Yeah, I'll just mention, so I kind of knew I wanted to go into industry going in, or at least at the beginning it was government, but then shifted over to industry during grad school. So I kind of went in with that mindset, and then I was able to fortunately do internships every single summer of my graduate career. And I think that was so enlightening for me, just because more importantly than finding out what I wanted to do, I found out what I didn't want to do, just because I think you learn a lot by being just immersed inside of that applied setting, whatever kind of career you want to go. And I think that's really important for kind of learning about yourself and learning about what kind of projects you want to work on and what type of team environments you want to be in. But in addition to that, I also found ways to like participate in, there were like student design competitions through different programs like APS or like the Human Factors and Ergonomic Society. That was another organization I was really a big part of, where they just had design competitions and just like kind of these extracurriculars that a lot of students and fellow students would probably just be like, oh, I don't have time for that. But for me, I made it a priority to team up with colleagues and even students from other programs. So do these things because it's a great way of, like, to your point, building your CV or building up your resume of like real world application and projects that are just more than just your, you know, dissertation work or even just your classroom skills. And those types of things were fun because they like provided an outlet outside of school, but then also worked on these skills that translated very well to kind of the career I'm in now.
I just want to ask the panel, Melissa, I'm so glad you brought up internships, and we just got a question about internships. First of all, just to clarify, did everybody else on the panel either do an internship or know about internships when you were in school, both undergrad and grad?
No.
No. You didn't do, okay, so only Melissa did an internship. This is very interesting. So one of the questions that somebody asked us is, how do we find out about internships? How do we explore them, and how do we know are the right ones for what we want to do, or does that not matter?
So I think one way is to leverage the career services office at your school. That's actually how I got my first job. I hadn't done an internship, and I actually hadn't even thought about, as a grad student, going to career services. But after having a chance encounter with the dean of the graduate school, like out in the real world, he told me, like, go to career services, have a meeting with someone there. I met with this advisor twice. We worked on my resume. I told her what I was interested in, and it was literally a couple weeks later, I got an email from her that said, hey, there's a company looking for somebody with a background in psychology with a graduate degree to do market research in pharmaceuticals. And I was like, oh, that's exactly what I'm looking for. So that office at your school is probably going to have good resources for you, both in terms of potential internships, but also, you know, full-time jobs when you graduate.
Honestly, just Googling it, looking up internships are like, they're out there. I mean, right now things are kind of complicated with you know, sheltering in place and COVID-19, but a lot of these opportunities exist out there. However, you need to start looking way earlier than you would expect. I think that's the biggest takeaway. I think a lot of students wait until like April or May, and they're like, oh, I want to do something for the summer. And by then, a lot of the internship applications are actually out and available in like October or November the year before. So I think it's just more of, you need to plan way ahead and just like look for these opportunities. And yeah, just look up any major company and type in internship, and you'll find them there, just because a lot of them use it as a way to, you know, essentially test people out for a summer. And it's a great way to get your foot in the door and meet people who would potentially be colleagues. So
Lisa, how did you find your internships? Was that the way?
Well, the very first one I found with the Navy when I was in undergrad, I just Googled it. I was just like, I want to, like, what can I do with this, you know, cognitive psychology intern? I literally looked up cognitive psychology, like summer programs or something like that, and found out about the Navy's internships for undergrads and graduate students. So that's how I found the first one. And the next two were also with like, I did a second one with the Navy. I did one with the Navy contractor. Those were all just found by talking to colleagues when I was interning at the Navy. The Google internship I found because one of the professors, former professors at my graduate program, had left and gone to industry, and then reached out to the program and was just like, you know, hey, if anyone's interested in being an intern, apply here, and you know, that way. So it's just more of a, part of it was just Googling it and then using my network at that point, where it's just like a lot of people in your network might have internships or know of internships. So
thank you. We got a question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
Oh, I just wanted to add just a really quick little thing. I didn't learn about internships admittedly until like my last year, but one of the resources that you could also do is talk to people at conferences, specifically all those booths that are there that give away that free swag. They're good for other things besides the free swag. You can also, I learned about several internships I could have applied for if I had talked to them more about that earlier in my career. So that's also a good way to do it. Conferences are great.
And virtual conferences too. So the next time you're going to virtual conferences, there will be an exhibit hall, and they'll be there. It'll be the different booths will be staffed by members of that community or members of staff members for that organization, for that company. They want to talk to you. That's why they're there. They're there to market themselves for all sorts of different reasons. So very useful. So we have a question from Andrea, and I really appreciate this question because it's a very important one. Andrea asks, what would graduate school look like for people who do not want to stay in academia? I know a lot of the typical graduate school experience focuses on applying for grants, going to conferences, etc., but these are all in preparation for a path to being a professor or part of a research lab. Who wants to take this question?
I mean, I can speak to it. I don't mind starting again. So in this case, in the case for my career progression, doing a lot of the things that I did in graduate school, publishing, doing research, developing those critical thinking skills were all actually really good and really helpful. There are definitely companies out there who appreciate all of the steps that you go through to get the PhD, publications being important, though not the most important thing like it is in academia. But it's good to see that you have done research, that you've done that experience. Applying for grants is actually a really good way to get experience in budgeting, in asking people, you may have to ask for money at some points, you might have to apply for grants and things like that at your industry career as well. And so I found that a lot of the experiences that I did in graduate school were actually really helpful. Though not necessarily the exact research topics that I chose to do, of course, but getting a lot of that, so I would say get more interdisciplinary experience if you can while in graduate school, and then get involved with more organizations as well.
And the communications, it cannot be overemphasized, it cannot be overstressed, that is a top skill. For the panel, have you all found not only that has been so incredibly vital for your success, but it's also vital for your organization's success? Is it something that you've learned in the process of your education and training?
Absolutely. I would say when you prepared us for this panel, one of the questions was, what is the most important skill that you need in your day-to-day? It's absolutely communication. I feel like my job today is 50% research, and the other 50% is building relationships and trying to socialize your research to people who maybe don't understand it or understand how it could be useful for them. That is half the battle. You can do great stuff, but if your stakeholders don't understand it, then it falls on deaf ears, right? And so I think the communication is huge. At least one of the things when I was first getting hired that resonated with a lot of hiring managers was my presentation experience. So when they didn't care as much about publications, I'd say, it was more, oh, you spoke at this conference with this many people in the audience. And so being able to demonstrate that you can distill really complex ideas into something for non-technical audiences, that is huge in industry.
Yeah, we will have projects where, you know, a result might be a 150 slide long PowerPoint deck of heavy quantitative findings, and the ability to get up in front of a room of stakeholders who were not familiar with the research approach that you took to start it, or even how you would approach to ask, you know, to answer a question they have, and be able to take all of that data and tell them a clean, clear story in 10 slides to give them the direction they need to go with their business is critical in the line of work that I do. And I think especially teaching and the opportunities I sought out with specific training on teaching in graduate school and volunteering to give lectures any chance I got really made me comfortable getting up in front of groups and doing that sort of thing.
So a key thing that we could all do if we want to move into industry, but quite frankly, in any type of career, is to aim to improve our oral and written communication skills. Is that what you're all saying? Yes, I thought so. Very important points. We have a fantastic question from Regina. Thank you for asking this, Regina. She wants to know, do you have any tips for changing the perception that a psychology background is clinical versus psychological science or cognitive? How do you handle that? Oh, Regina, you've asked a really thoughtful question.
Can you maybe re-ask it? I don't think I understood it the first time.
Do you have any tips for changing the perception that a psychology background is clinical versus that it's psychological science or more on the cognitive side?
I would say what I did is that for like the everyday person, I didn't necessarily say I'm a cognitive psychologist. I would say I'm a cognitive scientist, which is also true based on my background. So I tried to, and in my current career, my position is called scientist, not psychologist. So I think a lot of the way, at least in my area of industry, that we combat that is using terminology like scientist rather than psychologist. So no one thinks that I'm in my career that I have a clinical background, because my title is scientist.
Interesting.
Yeah,
good to know.
I would say that from my perspective, as long as you've got it in your resume, your cognitive psychology or cognitive science, I don't think you get that question as much. What I do laugh at though is I've worked in companies where I'm either the only or one of just a few PhDs. So the perception might be a little different than a place like Google or where Hotaka works, where there are more common. And so I joke that I'm often the PhD of everything, right? Anything. They just think I'm an expert in everything because I have a PhD. So there is a lot of expertise you can bring to any situation, but just, slowly educating them. This is my background. I am not a clinical psychologist, but I can still help you understand people in some capacity.
So it sounds like it's not as big of an issue because the community and the industry understands the value of the work that you're doing in psychological science. That's good to know. I'd like to ask the panel, what has been the most challenging aspect or element to transitioning into industry, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah.
Taka.
So, like others have said, communication is very important because I work more often with non-psychometricians than other psychometricians, even though there are other psychometricians in my organization. And when I talk to them, talk to coworkers, I have to simplify how I talk, and so to make sure that they understand, because they're not experts in the things I do. But the challenge is I don't want to let that simplify my work. I want to keep my work at a PhD level, and then when I talk to others, I want to simplify, but I don't want to simplify my work so that it's easier to communicate to the other coworkers. So that's a big challenge.
I've had, I think, three big things. One is timeline-based work, and working in a team on that timeline-based work. In graduate school, I had my own research projects and I got them done as fast as I could, but I was the only one that it really mattered for. If I didn't get my research done, it was my PhD that wasn't going to move forward. That's not the way things work in consulting and industry. If I drop the ball on something, there's a lot of other people on my team that it affects. As a result of that too, like learning how to manage people and step back and go from being the person that controlled every single aspect of my project work, from recruitment of my participants all the way through the analysis and the reporting, is just not something I can do anymore. And I have to rely and trust other people and teach them to do that. And I think one very practical one was simply learning how to use PowerPoint better. Those nice black and white slides with charts and a few bullet points work really well in academia, but in industry, it does not work at all. And it took me quite a while actually to become a much better user of PowerPoint, to learn how to create impactful slides and communicate things in a really concise way that didn't just rely on writing things on a page.
Good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Anybody else? Melissa, have you had any challenges that you have overcome, that you've been able to manage as you've migrated more towards industry?
I think the biggest shift from going from academia to a company like Google is that you just have to speed up. It almost feels exponentially in a lot of ways. Mike brought up a good point about you're now working on a team and there's lots of people counting on you. And when you're working in an industry kind of specifically like a tech environment, things are just a lot faster. So in academia, you can probably take your time and do like a 150 person type study that's hour-long sessions each one, and you have to adapt that to be able to do quicker methods maybe, or do maybe like larger scale survey type things, or be able to adapt apply different methods in a way that maybe it's not going to be the thorough, beautiful academic scale that you would if you were doing this for a grant or in graduate school. But you still need to be able to get an answer and be able to give your stakeholders and your cross-functional partners an answer. And you're coming to the team and you're bringing, as the researcher or as this person in this role, you are bringing that expertise. So people are relying on you to be able to give them an answer, and you're confidence in it. So sometimes you might not be able to do take them as much time as you need. So you need to be able to learn and fly and apply the different techniques and methods to whatever situation or problem you're trying to solve. So I think that just takes a little bit of time adapting in that way. But you, like Otaka mentioned, you still want to be able to you're relying on your expertise and your PhD training to be able to still answer those questions in an effective way, even if you're doing it at a quicker speed than you normally would if you were in academia.
Thank you. It's so interesting to hear of the different the challenges that people have faced and how you've been able to meet them and move forward towards success, towards continued success. Does anybody else want to share a thought about this? Okay, we have another question. Caroline asks, if you're graduating in May, when is a good time to apply for jobs? But I want to add to this question. I want to ask you also, how does networking play in getting jobs and actually landing jobs? And how soon, if I'm graduating in May, how soon should I start networking? So can you talk about that?
I'll just mention it. Sorry.
No, go ahead,
Yeah.
Melissa. I've been going first a lot.
I think that the academic model of jobs mirrors pretty well to the industry model of jobs. Like, if you think about if you were going to academia, you would be applying for positions and going on job talks and all of that. That would be happening like probably in the fall of the year before you graduate, and that's when you'd be going around. And I think the timing works out. This pretty much the same in industry, at least from what I can tell. It takes a while to get hired in many places and anywhere. I think you just have to be very confident of when you will actually be graduating, because I think that can sometimes, cause some issues if you end up taking longer than you expect. But most of these jobs, yeah, you want to be reaching out to them pretty early, like I'd say fall of the year before. And same with your network. I would say the network even the summer before, you just like floating out like, hey, all random people I've met at conferences and people I've like done panels with or attended sessions with over the course of your graduate career, alumni from your program. Start reaching out to them the year before and just say, hey, remember me? Like, I'm actually going to be graduating and coming to the end of this journey and looking for my next opportunities, and just getting those, opening those doors. And ideally, these are with people you've already like have some kind of connection or relationship with. But yeah, start early. It never hurts to start as early as you know, as long as you know when you're graduating, and then work backwards from there.
But you could start even earlier. I mean, you don't have to necessarily know when you're graduating, correct me if I'm wrong, because you can start the networking early in your education, so more and more people in the community know who you are, know what your intelligence and passion and excitement is for, and so that when it is the time for you to be graduating, let's say in a year or a year and a half, you will already have that network set up, ready for you, waiting for you when you're going to be ready to move into their company.
Exactly.
Have you found this to be the case?
In my first, I can 100% say that that is the case. Like, networking as soon as possible, talking to as many people, having informational interviews, connecting with alumni, connecting with people at conferences, like build your network, like start building your network from the beginning. I mean, you're already doing that as part of your PhD with other professors and things like that at conferences, other graduate students, but also talking to other people at the conferences, exhibitors and things like that. I'm going to be completely honest here in that my job came through talking to an exhibitor at a conference. So I talked to them, and I talked to them several years in a row. And then in my they already had my name in their system. If they find someone that they like, that they talk to and they're interested in, that people will put your name in the system. And that includes like even people I've reached out into LinkedIn. People put your name in their system, and I ended up being contacted by this exhibit, by Exponent, and they recruited me rather than I didn't fill out an application until after I was already getting an interview, in my case. And I think that a lot of that networking is an incredibly powerful tool, informational interviews, talking to people in the companies you're interested in, because a lot of the times companies incentivize recruiting, they encourage recruiting, and people are motivated that if they think you're a great candidate to put you in there. And if someone puts you into the system, you're more likely to get those initial phone interviews than if you just fill out a blind application.
Well, the reality, oh, go ahead, please.
So just to piggyback on that, as someone who hires a lot of people now, I have my Rolodex, to use an outdated term, of resumes for people who've reached out for coffees who I've really liked, but at the time couldn't hire them. And that's something that I keep with me. So if I do have an open position, that's where I first go to look to say, hey, is there someone here who I already like and I already trust who maybe is a good fit for this role? So absolutely.
The reality, so I apologize. The reality is that you've just described is that, and in particular, the panel here, you are all looking for new collaborators. You're all looking for keeping your eyes open for the best talent, the new talent that's going to be coming down the pipeline. And so to be able to network and talk to people early in my career would be beneficial for me, because I'm already establishing myself as a known quantity in your brains, so that when I do actually need a job, you're going to be ready and excited for that. And Iona, I'm glad you mentioned, and Lindsay, you referenced this to the informational interviews. I wanted to just give the audience a free resource. I wrote an article about informational interviews, which lists all the questions that you can ask, as well as the template of the email that you can use. You can find it online. Just Google my name and informational interviews. It was on Physics Today, their website. So you can read that for free, informational interviews. So we have another question. And Isabel asks a really interesting question, and it was kind of something related to something I wanted to ask the panel too. She asks, in leaving academia, were you concerned about doors closing and being unable to return? And so my piggyback question to that is, how has industry, can you give me an example of how something very specific that maybe we haven't talked about before, how industry is so different from academia? But going back to her question, were you concerned about the door closing and not being able to come back?
I mean, to give one perspective for me, no, but I was like very confident in my decision that I didn't want to go in academia. That said, you do see people go from business to academia. You see it a lot in business schools, where people will work for a long time and then start teaching. But I don't know, for me personally, I've never really even considered going back to academia. I think I found something that I like to do and don't have plans to go back.
Well, what I've in my interaction, and I'm, for the audience, I'm a STEM career consultant and professional speaker on STEM career issues. And so in my experience, what I've noticed is that people, particularly with PhDs, although you don't necessarily have to, who have years of industry experience that's very diverse and very innovative, and really has given them this unique experience and perspective, they are often welcomed back to academia, often in positions which could be called professors of practice, or they could come in as program coordinators or program managers of new types of perhaps master's programs where students are going to go into industry. But the universities are appreciative of the value that people who've worked in industry bring to the students, as well as the network that you bring to the students, as well as the idea of building projects for the students to work on that are based in real world scenarios and challenges. So for Caroline, for your question, excuse me, for Isabel, for your question, I think as long as you keep the networking up and understand what academia needs as you advance in your career and want to come back maybe later, I think you can still achieve that. So I appreciate that. And we got another great, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I can add one more thing to it. Is I would say that it often can probably depend upon the career that you do. I know that a lot of academia, obviously, publications are really, really important. And I know, at least in my career path, I'm still able to publish, though it's not obviously at the same pace as academia, but publication is still something that I do, and I still work on doing research that gets published. So I know that, yeah. So I think I think that since we have those experiences, and a lot of our industries incorporate that and pay for us to do the research, that we can use that experience to help get us academic jobs if we wanted to go back.
A question for the panel. Oh, go ahead.
Just if it's something, if someone is worried about closing doors going into industry, there are ways to stay involved with industry or stay involved with academia as well. For instance, like guest lecturing or speaking at conferences, continuing these things that are very much like more academic in nature. I know I've done that just because there's always like the, thought in my back of my mind that sometime maybe I will go back into academia, but it's just one of those things where I also just enjoy doing that. And it's the way to continue growing my network now and also connecting with professionals in the field. So I think it's just more of like, only doors are closed if you, deliberately don't want to go that way or, aren't interested. But I think it's just more of if you can find ways to stay involved with academia, even if you are in industry.
Thank you, Melissa. And this brings me to my follow-up question for the panel. Raise your hand if you are still interacting with academics of any kind. Okay, all right, interesting. All right, so you see there is that opportunity. We just got a fantastic question, and it's so important. Imposter syndrome. Have you experienced it as you transitioned to industry or at any other point in your career? How did you deal with that? How did you navigate that?
I have imposter syndrome right now, being on this panel. um,
Same.
yeah, all the I think it's a constant thing. Going into industry while in academia, I think imposter syndrome is alive and real and continuous. And I think what matters is that you can work past that imposter syndrome and just tell yourself that you are worth it, realize that you are worth it. And not everybody in the world gets a PhD or works toward higher education. Not everybody can, but you are working toward that. You are doing that work and you belong.
I love that. You do belong. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term imposter syndrome, it's the sense that once we achieve a certain level of success, and honestly, this could happen at any point in our education and training and careers, that we suddenly feel like a fraud, like somebody is going to find out that we don't belong here. So I appreciate the language that you chose, Iona. You do belong. You have chosen this career. You have chosen to study this subject, and you absolutely do belong here. Did anybody else have a comment about imposter syndrome?
I would say I definitely felt it strongly in grad school, never wondering if I belonged or if I was good enough or smart enough. That did, especially at first, that did carry over into my first job. You know, the thoughts in the back of my head, why the hell would they hire a PhD? They don't really know what I do. They think I can do all these things that I was never trained to do. I'm a cognitive psychologist who knows development, and that's it. That starts to go away. I mean, one of the things that I would say about industry is you do get more feedback, right? I think you get a lot more feedback, whether it's through a performance review or from your team or from your boss saying, hey, that was a really great presentation, really great research output. You know, you can tie what you're doing directly to revenue for the organization. And so you do, I feel like, get a lot more positive feedback than I did get in grad school. And I'm not sure if the panel agrees or disagrees, but that's how I felt.
And Lindsay, in terms of the feedback, and this is for the whole panel also, is the feedback that you get in industry more quantitative? So it's easier for you to better understand what your metrics are and where you are in your path to achieving goals? Or are they still more qualitative, or is it a combination?
I think it's both, right? Like certain goals are certainly tied to revenue or, you know, positive feedback from people, but a lot of your soft skills are hugely valued, right? And so you get a lot of feedback on, hey, you're doing a great job developing your team, or you did a really great job connecting with that client, something that's a little less quantitative, but both I'd say are equally important.
It also depends on the company. Some companies like mine really do quantify your performance. Like, we get rated by our project managers on a set of skills that gets translated into a literal position on a graph. So you can actually see quantitatively your progression over time. But that is by no means the norm necessarily of what I've heard from other people I know working in industry whose feedback might just be more qualitative. So you can get both, but it definitely is not consistent from place to place.
From organization to organization, as well as industry and sector to industry and sector?
Probably, yeah.
Interesting. Okay. We have one more question, and then we're going to do our final statements. But Chloe asks, and I'm really appreciative that she asked this. She wanted us to address COVID-19 and the pandemic, and she wants to know, in regards to looking for remote working opportunities, will you be permitted to continue remote work after the pandemic is under control? What was that experience like in moving to remote work for you? Hataka, do you want to start?
Sure. So COVID-19 changed the testing industry a lot because students now, they're often taking exams from their homes instead of testing centers now. And there's concerns about cheating and security. So a lot of things changed. And as for the position of psychometrician, even before COVID-19, a lot of psychometrician positions are remote. So the work is very doable at home. You just need a laptop, and you might have to call people, but a lot of times you're on your own dealing with data. So yeah.
Anybody else want to share? Okay.
My job was pretty easy to transition into remote mostly. As to the question of whether or not it will remain remote, I think that my company has become a lot more open to having more remote days during the week. I think there are sometimes when you have to go into the office in order to get so I have to go out on inspections and stuff like that sometimes, and so I have to go and get materials or use the printing facilities or use some of the lab space and things like that. So there are some things that I'll need to go into once in a while, but I know my company's become more open to remote work since COVID.
And just to add to that, my team, we've actually been way more productive at home because we don't have people bothering us all the time. And our jobs are computer-based for the most part too. But just from a general perspective, as I mentioned, I'm working on this workplace experience survey, and we did a survey of 55,000 employees across the globe, and we found some astounding number, like 74% of them want their companies to expand remote work. And we're constantly talking to our clients who lease office space throughout cities across the globe, and they're all considering this question. They all have recognized, hey, we're more productive than we thought we were going to be working from home. Let's think about how to implement this long term and be successful at it. So I do think it is going to be a sea change. It's just a matter of how wide that spreads.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see how different industries respond and move forward in this new world as well. All right, we're down to our last question, ladies and gentlemen. For the panel, can you give one piece of advice for the audience members about moving into industry, your most precious and most important piece of advice? Mike, why don't we start with you?
I think that just learning how to change your communication to speak industry is just incredibly helpful. So instead of saying like you're a psychologist, say that you're an expert in human behavior. I mean, it's just a little thing that might make a little more sense to somebody in industry. But then when it comes to, I mean, going back to the imposter syndrome thing a bit too, I think the best piece of advice my advisor in graduate school ever gave me when I was going into my dissertation defense was, he's like, you're the expert on this in the room. Nobody knows your research better than you do. Even I don't know it as well as you do. So that was something to me early in my career that I took into going into client presentations, is that I knew the information we were communicating that day better than anyone else. And that helped me early in my career get that confidence to be able to, present and be able to communicate with people, to people clearly and with confidence. And I think always just remembering that the skills you're developing now translate to the real world, or I guess not real world, but industry, and you can find a career that you find intellectually stimulating and rewarding, even if it's not in academia.
Thank you, Mike. Melissa, what are your thoughts?
I +1 everything Mike just said. And also I think it's just more figuring out what you enjoy about science or academia. I mean, you went into a PhD program or a graduate program for a reason. What was it that motivated you or like inspired you? And then try to find ways to see where you can do that, whether it still is in academia, but maybe not in like a traditional role, or maybe it is in industry. But I think to your point about things changing right now, especially with the COVID-19 situation, I think there's going to be a lot more opportunities to really craft people's careers in a way that you really want. So just go and just figure out what you really are passionate about, and then try to make that into a career.
Thank you, Melissa. And that joy moment, the joy of following your joy and identifying what it is that truly brings you that intellectual pleasure, I think is an underappreciated point. So I'm very appreciative that you mentioned it. It's something that we can do. And I also like the fact, Melissa, that you talked about the idea of creating your own career, because certainly we absolutely can do that. Hotaka, what's your final thought?
I don't know how many undergrads are in the audience, but if you're in college, I think you should take any course that interests you. And you don't have to take the entire course. You could just sit in for a week. Maybe you don't even have to register. You could just talk to the professors and sit in and just really find your interest, because one one class might change your career. And for me, it was the statistics course that I took in undergrad. And I immediately knew that this is really interesting and I want to learn more about it. So find your interest.
Expand, expand, expand. Lindsay.
Sure. So I would say manage your expectations and be humble, right? Just because you have this PhD title doesn't mean a company owes you a higher title or a higher salary. I mean, I would almost say potentially go in at a title lower than maybe you think you deserve, because then you can really exceed in that role versus coming into a higher position and completely failing. You know, as an example, I started at my first job as a senior analyst. 2 months into the role, I sat down with my boss and he says, we made a huge mistake, you should be a manager. And then I was promoted right then, right? You will move up quickly just because you guys are all so smart. Just manage your expectations. No one owes you anything. And get used to the fact that you may be in a position and you may have the same title as someone and they have way less education than you, but they definitely have more business acumen. And so in that sense, be really humble, right? You are a PhD, you know a lot, but you're going into industry and there's a lot of things that you don't know. People need to like you and need to have confidence that yes, you're smart, but you're also someone that they can get along with and you're not gonna flaunt your intelligence or your PhD in their face. So say manage expectations, be humble.
Thank you, Lindsay. I'm humbled by your answer. That was very insightful. And last but absolutely not least, Iona.
My one piece of advice, I of course echo everything everyone else has said. I think they're all amazing, great pieces of advice. I want to add to that, get involved in your community, get involved in other organizations, get involved in different groups, gain all the experience, to meet as many people as you can. You never know who you're going to meet. You never know what kinds of experiences that you're going to get, and you never know how that can impact your ability or chance to get in a job or a career that you want later. Like I had already touched upon, I got involved in APS a lot more than the average person by getting on the student board. I got involved in my graduate student senate as well back at Lehigh University where I got my PhD. Like getting involved with people allowed me to get the soft skills that I need, get a lot of the soft skills I needed to speak up in front of large audiences and learn how to communicate my science better. So becoming a more active member of your community, even if it's virtual now, can be really helpful in establishing the skills you need for a career.
And I think that's a wonderful way to leave this because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build community here. So I want to thank this truly amazing panel. You guys were really very insightful and I appreciate you taking your time to share your ideas and perspectives and advice with the audience. I want to thank the audience. Thank you for your kind attention. As I mentioned, this was recorded, so you will be able to access it and you will be getting an email about it. Stay tuned for other events. And I'd like to thank the APS for their kind support of this endeavor. Remember, they are your strategic career partner. So no need to wish you good luck because you don't need it, but I'm excited to hear, we are excited to hear where you decide to pursue and maybe build your own career in your life. So thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. This concludes the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.